Welcome to EPG Pathshala on the course of History and Ideologies of Social Work. My name is Murli Desai. I'm a former professor from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Today's topic is cultural diversity and ideologies of multiculturalism. We will look at cultural diversity and its concepts today. We will identify causal factors for the cultural conflicts that are taking place, and we will end with how to protect and promote cultural diversity through multiculturalism, etc. Okay, first let's see what culture means. The UNESCO noted that culture is defined as the whole set of signs by which the members of a given society recognize one another, while distinguishing them from people not belonging to that society. It has also been viewed as a set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of a society or social group, encompassing, in addition to art and literature, lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. It is important to note that cultures are not static. They change over time as new generations reject or reformulate some aspects of traditional ways of living. If we apply this concept to the Indian states, say Maharashtra culture versus Tamil Nadu culture, we can see how we identify people of Maharashtra through these cultural factors as different from those of Tamil Nadu. However, at the same time, we cannot say that Maharashtra culture has been same over a period of centuries. Every culture goes through changes with reference to changes in the environment. Culture is about the attitudes and values underpinning patterns of traditions, customs in everyday life, such as how the role of men and women are seen in society, the way children are brought up, language one speaks, what one eats, how one dresses, decorates, furnishes one's home, religious practices, drama, music, dance, literature, etc. Now, what is cultural diversity? Culture is diverse as it often linked to ethnicity, which refers to diverse groups of people that not only have a common descent, but also share similarities of physical type, if it's a racial ethnic group, customs, traditions, and language, depending on the regional group, and sometimes the religious aspects. According to a UN Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Diversity of Cultural Expressions of 2005, cultural diversity refers to the manifold ways in which the cultures of groups and societies find expression. It is made manifest not only through the varied ways in which the cultural heritage of humanity is expressed, augmented and transmitted through the variety of cultural expressions, which we discussed just a while ago, but also through diverse modes of artistic creation, production, dissemination, distribution, enjoyment, whatever the means and technologies used. There is a need to emphasize the universality of human rights while maintaining cultural differences, because we say human rights are universal, but we are saying culturally there is diversity. So is there a contradiction? There is a need to emphasize that both need to be balanced. Full and unqualified recognition of cultural diversity strengthens the universality of human rights and ensures their effective exercise. It is also important to understand cultural relativity as a practice of evaluating any culture by its own standards and trying not to project your value system onto them. An example very often given at the international level is that in India, parents prefer to sleep their children with them in their own bedroom. Whereas in the United States, the babies are supposed to have, even as babies, separate bedrooms. Because culturally, They require that there is separation of the two. However, Indians do not find it appropriate, and the Americans do not find the Indian practice appropriate. And therefore, there's a need to see culture in a relative manner. That there are reasons that groups of people do what they do because it makes good sense to them. So instead of being judgmental about another culture, it is important to see cultural practices in their context. However, although cultural diversity is as important as biodiversity, which is important for sustainable environment, cultural diversity is important for sustainable societies. But there are threats to cultural diversity. Let us see what these are. Now, development, as we have seen in earlier modules, has brought about a monocultural approach which is based on individualism and consumerism. And therefore, it is all similar. Today you find people wearing similar clothes all over the world. People wearing similar type of ornaments all over the world. Or the lifestyles of decorating your house, all are becoming more and more similar today, thanks to development, thanks to consumerism. This cultural homogenization has led to threats to cultural diversity. One main example here is also of the language English. In India itself, we find that the linguistic diversity or the sustainability of different language groups, the languages itself is being threatened today because more and more educated people are using English as the main language, like we are doing in this module. Eurocentrism also is a threat to cultural diversity because it means that everything that the Europeans or the Western people do is superior and need to be followed by people in the rest of the world. Now, not only that, it also destroys the cultural nuances of different ethnic groups, different countries, different religious groups towards homogenization. So, threats to cultural diversity is one thing. Cultural conflicts, which are active confrontations between different cultures, is another phenomenon that we will look at now. Conflicts between religions, races, castes, and linguistic groups have increased in the recent times. Multiculturalists do not perceive any link between cultural diversity and conflict or instability. One might think that conflicts are increasing because of the diversity. Because there are so many religions, we fight. Because there are so many language groups in India, we fight. Multiculturalists say that that is not true. There is no linkage between cultural diversity and cultural conflict. They hold that such diversity is compatible with political cohesion and cultural recognition, which underpins political stability. From this perspective, the denial of cultural recognition results in isolation and powerlessness, providing a breeding ground for extremism and the politics of hate. If people are told, speak only Hindi and don't speak Tamil and don't speak Bengali, this is denial of cultural recognition, which results in a feeling of isolation, powerlessness, and politics of hate. Prejudicing ideologies and religious fundamentalism play a major role in creating cultural conflicts, as we will see in the next slide. Okay, let us see what these prejudicing ideologies with reference to culture are. Well, culture is a source of identity. It can also lead to stereotypes about cultures of others, resulting in tension, social exclusion, conflicts, and even violence. Culture-based prejudicing ideologies comprise ethnocentrism, Eurocentrism, racism, and casteism. We've already discussed Eurocentrism. Now let's see ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is a prejudicing ideology that judges Another culture by the standard of one's own cultures, which we just discussed, needs to be avoided. An assumption in ethnocentrism is that one's own culture is superior to that of the other. It often suggests that the way something is done in other ethnic groups is inferior to the way it is done in one's own ethnic groups. For example, we believe that if the North Indians eat more wheat-based chapatis, etc., and South Indians eat more rice-based food items, the North Indians ethnocentrically can say that wheat is better, so South Indians are inferior because they eat rice, and vice versa. The South Indians may believe that the North Indians are inferior because they give more importance to wheat than they give to rice. So, to consider what is a cultural practice in one's own culture as superior to that of the other is ethnocentrism. It blocks recognition of other cultures as good and necessary for others, as their own for themselves. Such ethnocentrism leads to ethnic stereotypes, intolerance, discrimination, and violence against those with cultural background different than one's own. Racism consists of attitudes and actions often based on prejudices and often deriving from stereotypes that discriminate against certain people because they are seen to belonging to a particular race. In India, we see this with reference to people from the Northeast and the prejudices, stereotypes, conflicts, and violence incurred on them. Racist attitudes include the view that people of some ethnic origins are less important and valuable than those from other ethnic origins. And Indians do face racism in white race-dominated countries, but Indians themselves practice racism with reference to non-whites in the same countries and other foreigners besides the Northeasterners, which have a different race. Casteism, we've discussed the caste system in earlier modules and the prejudices of the so-called upper caste against the lower castes, which is based on a prejudicing ideology of casteism which justifies this hierarchy as though it is based on some natural inferiority, superiority. It justifies intolerance, discrimination, violence, and in India, casteism is highly deep-rooted even today. Besides prejudicing ideologies, what leads to cultural conflicts, especially religious conflicts, is religious fundamentalism. Now, in order to understand religious fundamentalism, let us see what is secularism first, or what secularization has done. Secularism has brought about a distinction between politics and religion. However, secularization has contributed to a decline of traditional religion and a weakening of what is seen as the moral fabric of a society. In many parts of the world, religious revivalism has assumed, therefore, a political form. When something is denied, which is important for the society, it comes back, it gets revived in a different form. Fundamentalism refers to a commitment to ideas and values that are seen as basic or foundational, which has an enduring and unchanging character, unlike relativism. So in the case of religious fundamentalism, the fundamentals have usually but not always been derived from the content of the sacred text. They are generally the interpretations. Fundamental tendencies are identified in all of the world's major religions, whether it's Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, anyone. Religious fundamentalism has arisen out of religious ignorance and prejudices and as a reaction to politicization, secularization, and homogenization. In the context of colonization, where they were actually the local peoples religions were considered inferior. India has a long history of religious conflicts, starting with pre-independence period and mainly culminating in the partition in India in 1947, which observed massive religious conflict and violence in India. Today, communalism has come to pervade in all aspects of life, particularly areas which are the most sensitive, such as education, media, law, and even culture. Communal politics in India has resorted to manipulation or distortion of historical facts to incite religious sentiments and consciousness. We've seen the British writing history with a particular perspective. We find different political parties wanting to rewrite history from their own perspective, basically with the idea of communalizing education, communalizing politics. The intensification of communal politics have led to incidents of mass communal violence like the anti-Sikh riots of '84, bomb blasts in 1993, terrorist attack in Mumbai in 2008, Gujarat riots in 2002, and so on, which has caused loss of life and property, gross violation of fundamental human rights, marginalization and disenfranchisement of certain sections of people. Such violent religious communalism have their sources in religious ignorance, prejudices and fundamentalism, as we discussed a while ago. The causes of religious conflict are complex, deep-seated and multidimensional. Religious communalism assumes that people belonging to one religion have similar interests and they are opposed to the interests of people belonging to the other religion. The polarizing approach. Such ignorance about the other provide a fertile ground for breeding sentiments of hatred and animosity. Ignorance also leads to stigmatization and negative representation of the other, most often the minorities. In the context of religious differences and ignorance, prejudices and ethnocentrism flourish, which leads to the perception that one's own religion is the only true religion. What role did colonization play in fanning religious fundamentalism? Religious fundamentalism arises in deeply troubled societies, particularly societies afflicted by an actual or perceived crisis of identity. The impact of colonialism helps to explain why, although fundamentalism can be found across the globe, its most potent and influential manifestations have been found in the developing world, which have gone through colonization and attacks on their identities. Colonial rule generally devalued and often suppressed indigenous cultures. As a result, the post-colonial societies inherited a weakened sense of identity, and the subordination to Western powers continued. In this context, religious fundamentalism offers a non-Western political identity on the basis of religion and therefore is on the rise. Militancy is an aspect that is the extreme, that's a result of extreme religious fundamentalism. Fundamentalists are usually happy to see themselves as militants in the sense that militancy implies passionate and robust commitment. Religious fundamentalism has been associated with the existence of a hostile and threatening other. This demonized other may take various guises, from secularism and permissiveness to rival religions, westernization, Marxism. You will see today's the IS, the Islamic State, attacking all of these. It's not just that they attack non-Muslims. They attack even among Muslims those who are westernized, those who are leftists, and so on. The consequences of this militancy is a willingness to engage in extra-legal, anti-constitutional political action, and sometimes violence and terrorism. Now, what needs to be done? We saw the importance of cultural diversity. We saw that there are threats to cultural diversity, there are cultural conflicts, We also saw the causal factors for the cultural conflicts. Now, cultural diversity needs to be promoted, and how? As we discussed earlier, there is a convention on the protection and promotion of the diversity of cultural expressions. And its main objectives are as follows: to protect and promote the diversity of cultural expressions, to create the conditions for cultures to flourish and to freely interact in a mutually beneficial manner, to encourage dialogue among cultures with a view to ensuring wider and balanced cultural exchanges in the world in favor of intercultural respect and a culture of peace, to foster interculturality in order to develop cultural interaction in the spirit of building bridges among people, to promote respect for the diversity of cultural expressions and raise awareness of its value at the local, national, and international levels, to give recognition to the distinctive nature of cultural activities, goods, and services as vehicles of identity, values, and meaning. The guiding principles for this, according to the convention, are the principle of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, principle of equal dignity and respect for all cultures, principle of the complementarity of economic and cultural aspects of development, to say both are important, principle of equitable access for everyone, principle of openness and balance. Multiculturalism is ideology we already started referring to in this module. What is multiculturalism and what is its historical context? Multiculturalism entered public discourse in the West in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when both Australia and Canada had begun to allow Asian immigrants. Multiculturalism refers to the policies by central states and local authorities that have been put in place to manage and govern the new multi-ethnicity created by these non-white immigrant populations. However, India has always been multicultural, with reference to several ethnic groups and language groups and religious groups. As a concept, as an ideology, if we see it as a descriptive term, multiculturalism has been taken to refer to cultural diversity that arises from racial, ethnic, and language differences. However, as a normative term, as multiculturalism that is desirable, it implies a positive endorsement, even celebration of communal diversity, based on either the right of different cultural groups to recognition and respect, or to the alleged benefits to the larger society. Distinctive cultures deserve to be protected and strengthened, particularly when they belong to minority or vulnerable groups. Multiculturalism opposes cultural imperialism and homogenization, and opposes states whose only objectives are the survival and well-being of the dominant cultural group. A demand to renounce cultural identity as a condition for free and equal citizenship is not desirable and also not viable. However, the convention also says that we need to move beyond multiculturalism, which is, as we discussed, celebration of diversity. We need to move to encouragement, positive encouragement of encounters between cultural groups. We'll see how. Through interculturality. Now, this concept has been promoted by the convention and by the activists of the multicultural activists. Now, let's see what it means. According to this UN convention, interculturality refers to the existence and equitable interaction of diverse cultures and the possibility of generating shared cultural expressions through dialogue and mutual respect. It presupposes multiculturalism and results from intercultural exchange and dialogue, which is important. A multicultural existence may imply learning about other cultures to produce an acceptance or at least tolerance of different cultures in a society. On the other hand, an intercultural approach aims to go beyond passive coexistence to achieve a developing and sustainable way of living together in multicultural societies through the creation of understanding of, respect for, and dialogue between the different cultural groups. Some schools, some countries, some states, some regions which are experimenting with compulsory foreign language concept. Some generally there will be schools and colleges which say you either take Sanskrit or French or whatever, but there are schools which say you have to take a language which is not yours, and it could be from any of these which they may be offering in their educational system. So this is one example of how interculturality can be promoted. Multiculturalism may suggest official recognition for different languages or religions in a given state. But interculturality, which goes beyond that, requires that the majority be encouraged to learn about the minorities and with it the literature and culture of a minority and vice versa. The minority to be encouraged to learn about other minorities as well as about the majority. Minority cultural rights is an important component of multiculturalism. The term minority culture generally refers to the culture of the marginalized or the vulnerable groups who live in the shadow of majority populations with a different and dominant cultural ideology, the majority culture. The non-dominant position of minority groups does not always derive from the numerical weakness. It often has a qualitative dimension linked to the specific cultural and socio-economic characteristics of the community. For example, there are villages where the majority of the castes may be those belonging to the scheduled castes, and there may be just few families that belong to the upper castes. However, the dominant culture, the dominant identity is that of the minority upper caste groups. Such characteristics can produce value systems and lifestyles that are very different from or even incompatible with those of more dominant groups in society. These rights are specific to the groups to which they belong, each cultural group having different needs for recognition based on the specific character of its religion, traditions, and way of life. So we come to the end of this module where we have examined the concepts of culture and diversity, threats to cultural diversity due to cultural homogenization, and Eurocentric development. We reviewed the spread of cultural conflicts rooted in prejudicing ideologies and religious fundamentalism, arisen out of religious ignorance and prejudices, and as a reaction to politicization, secularization, and homogenization in the context of colonization. We then discussed the main objectives and guiding principles of the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression of 2005. Finally, we analyzed the ideologies of multiculturalism, interculturality, and minority cultural rights, important to protect and promote cultural diversity. Thank you very much, and I hope this module helps to do some introspection about our own culture, our own cultural identity, or prejudices about others' cultures, and how we can convert that into a more multicultural and intercultural approach to society. Thank you again.